It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. This week, we're going to talk about the 1988 kids musical comedy, nice little movie called Purple People Eater. This is based on a 1958 novelty song about a strange being that comes down from space, basically here just to get into a rock and roll band. It was written in about an hour by Sheb Wooley, who was an actor, a singer, and a rodeo guy. And he's also the actual guy who was recorded doing the famous Wilhelm scream that's used in sound effects even to this day. In fact, I think there's a whole thing where there are probably websites devoted to collecting every single time that's been used in a movie. It's been used in almost every Star Wars movie. Almost every George Lucas and Steven Spielberg movies used it at some point in time. But there was always a lot of question around what the song was really about. Was it an actual alien? Was the alien actually purple? Or does he eat purple people? The song says he eats purple people, but usually he's depicted as a purple creature who eats people. Which, if you kind of think about it, it's like, how do you make a kids movie out of that? It's sure, you can put a little fluffy creature in the movie like they did here, but he didn't eat any people. And there's definitely one person in this movie that he could have eaten, and I don't think anybody would have cared. But that's beside the point. It is notable to say that novelty songs were pretty popular in the 50s and 60s, and probably even before then. Maybe a little less notable like nowadays, with just aside from either being just a straight out comedian, you really only have Weird Al. That's really, gets kind of any kind of radio play. But back then, there would be whole radio shows devoted to playing novelty songs and comedy skits and stuff like that. Of course, Spike Jones is probably the best known person from the earlier days. And then Dr. Demento later. But yeah, you have, Purple People Eater, you had Monster Mash, you had They're Coming to Take Me Away, songs like that were just ends up being really, really popular, and actually kind of helps seed other things, like either like TV show ideas, or in this case, like a whole movie made that's completely and totally devoted to basically telling the story of the song. It's kind of wild, but it's kind of charming and cute, especially when it's made for kids. But the song was a really pretty big hit. I mean, so much so, as a tribute to the song, in the 70s, the defensive line for the Minnesota Vikings were called the Purple People Eaters. And they were a fearsome group, and I believe they actually did eat a few people from time to time. But so it was so popular that they, 30 years after the song came out, they made a movie. Not about the song, but about the stuff in the song. It's kind of wild how that really plays out. But this is one of those movies that pays a whole lot of nostalgic lip service to the 50s. That happened a lot in the 80s, between mid to late 50s to early 60s. Kind of nostalgic was really running high. It's kind of like nowadays, or at least within the last 5 to 10 years or so, there was an awful lot of emphasis put on 80s nostalgia, and we're going to see that happen with the 90s here very soon too, now that we're in the 2020s. But it's just kind of one of those things. In the 80s, it was all about the 50s, because all of the people who were now making movies, and one of the creative consultants on this movie was Jim Wynorski, who made a lot of movies for Roger Corman, a lot of exploitation movies in the 80s and 90s. But there were a lot of people who were running the show now who grew up in the 50s and the early 60s. So now they wanted to kind of talk about that, just like all those people who grew up in the 70s and 80s over the last 10 to 20 years wanted to do movies that took place in the 70s and 80s. So makes sense. It's a kind of cyclical sort of thing that Hollywood likes to do, I guess. But the movie did star, this movie, Purple People Eater, did star some notable older folks like Ned Beatty, Shelley Winters, and Peggy Lipton. But the kid actors, in particular, the star of the whole movie, the whole star of the movie is Neil Patrick Harris. This was right before he became Doogie Howser. Then also you have Dustin Diamond right before he got his most notable and his probably the only thing he'll ever be known for playing Screech on Saved by the Bell. That started just after this movie came out. And then as a really itty-bitty little girl, there's Thora Birch, who was in American Beauty and Ghost World in the later, at the end of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s. So yeah, some notable people actually in this movie. And there's actually a few of the other actresses that were in the movie that were the kid actors or the rest of the band that's formed in this movie. They go on to be TV stars in the 90s. So, there's some notable people in this, but we'll get back to that here in just a moment. So, there are a lot of things to talk about with this movie. First and foremost, there's a lot of 50 songs in this movie and some early 60s songs. This soundtrack would be one of those kind of like just song after song of people who would be very, very old today, who would have such such nostalgia for the songs that are in this. Now, this is the golden age of the golden oldies too, so I appreciate the songs that are in there. But it's kind of funny that this is the type of movie where these old 30-year-old songs are like still super relevant for everybody in this movie. It's actually really pretty funny how that works out, but it's kind of harmless and kind of silly, kind of helps play to the silly aspect of the movie, I guess. But you do have Little Richard and Chubby Checker, who both appear in this movie. Sheb Wooley is in this movie as the evil landlord, who has a really big part of the plot that concerns this movie. But you have Neil Patrick Harris, who plays Billy. He is a lover of animals, and boy, do I get this. He would rather hang out with animals than he would other people. So, yeah, I get it, kid. People suck. But his dad is going on a business trip to Europe, and the mom is going with him. So Grandpa, who's played by Ned Beatty, is going to stay with Billy and his little sister, who's the Thora Birch character. He's going to stay with them for the summer. And Grandpa kind of helps Neil Patrick Harris, and just kind of learn how to live life and have fun in the moment, and just kind of let loose a little bit. And you kind of teaches them, the fun of like, well, let's help me, spruce up my place a little bit here at the old folks' apartments. And it kind of teaches him the value of working with his hands and just being, just generally living life as fun as possible and kind of just letting loose. So then it's kind of funny though, because like Ned Beatty, I'm not exactly sure how old Ned Beatty was in 1988, but he seems really old in this movie. And like, I know he was in a lot of movies like in the 90s and stuff. I'm not even sure if he's still alive or not, to be honest with you, but he seems really old in this movie because like he's hard of hearing. He's got this, he's a little overweight. He just kind of seems like he's run down. But during the course of the movie, he starts to kind of liven up a little bit because he's kind of living vicariously through Billy, which is kind of sweet also. But during the sprucing up of the house and everything, Billy starts playing Grandpa's old 45 records and really kind of getting into the oldies. And one night he's playing the 45s, and Purple People Eater starts up, which was one of his dad's 45s that Grandpa just kind of keeps around. And all of a sudden, well, a Purple People Eater shows up outside. And the alien is basically there just to kind of help do two things. One, he's there to help Billy gain confidence and gain friends and really express himself musically. And two, he's there for to help the old folks fight off evil Sheb Woolley from shutting down the place and kicking all the old people out. And sure enough, he's able to play the saxophone music out of his horn. Ned Beatty's like, wow, that's really great. Hey, why don't you start a band, Billy? You've got a saxophonist already. And sure enough, Billy starts, playing the piano a little bit while Purple, which is what they call the Purple People Eater, plays the saxophone, and that kind of draws in this one girl that Billy kind of has a thing for, which unfortunately that kind of fizzled. You don't really see anything more with that relationship. But then Dustin Diamond comes in. He's a guitarist. Then you get this other girl who's a drummer, and they form a band called the Purple People Eaters. And they end up going to 4 Super Bowls, but never winning any. I'm just kidding. But anyway, the Purple only knows classic songs, and this actually makes sense because it takes 25 years for music to get from Earth to where Purple is from. So that makes sense. That's why he's playing all the old songs. It's not just because old people were making the movie. It was because it takes a long time for the planet to get the songs. There's some other things that kind of come up throughout the course of the movie, like the Shelley Winters character, who's Ned Beatty's best friend, lives at the old folks community with him. She gets sick, and she's going to have a hard time paying her rent, and of course this makes it easier for Sheb Woolley to just try to basically gentrify the whole place. And he's such an evil landlord that every time that it's mentioned on the radio that there's going to be this Labor Day Save Our Seniors benefit concert, he gets so mad at hearing everything about Purple being there, and you can meet Purple and you can sing along with Purple, and he gets so mad about that he decides to go out and kidnap Purple. And I kind of feel like this is a little bit of a kind of tongue-in-cheek way of saying that he's trying to rid himself of the legacy of this song, because I'm sure he was in some movies. He's in this movie, but he's in this movie because he wrote that song. So it's kind of funny how I think he's really just kind of playing almost like he hates his own creation. But anyway, that plan doesn't work. Purple gets free. He gets to the benefit on time. Everybody sings Purple People Eater. Everybody's happy. The old folks are saved. Mayor Little Richard says that he's not going to let anybody ever kick anybody who's elderly out onto the streets and evict them from their homes and so forth. And Purple decides to go home. But before it's realized that Billy has gained a lot of self-confidence, which was the whole point of the movie. Anyway, so let's get to the 3 things that I like about Purple People Eater. And this is kind of a silly little movie. I mean, this is a movie that I would have easily eaten up when I was 11 years old. If I hadn't, I think I knew that this movie existed. I don't think I ever saw this movie when I was a kid. And I would have loved it as a kid. It's one of those things where it's a really dumb movie, but it's really, really charming and sweet. And it's kids doing things that you wouldn't normally see kids do, like have an actual good rock band and do a fundraiser where they are they are part of the whole reason people come and want to help out the old folks and everything. You've got these weird side characters all over the place. And as I said earlier, this is a world where 50s and early 60s music was still relevant to everyone in the world, and not just the old fogies who are out of touch. There's fantastic chemistry between Neil Patrick Harris and Ned Beatty. It's just a really, really pleasant movie. Second, Neil Patrick Harris and Dustin Diamond are pretty great in this. You can tell immediately that Neil Patrick Harris is going to be a star. Just watching him, however old he was in this, probably 13 or 14 at the time this movie was being made, you can tell he's a star. He can actually carry this movie. And while it is mostly a movie where it's either him and Purple or him and Ned Beatty, I mean, he's still carrying the lion's share of the load of this movie. And if he doesn't work, this movie doesn't work. And I appreciated his character quite a bit. And so it's, it works because he is already like recognizable as a star in this. Now, the other side of it, though, is Dustin Diamond. Now, he's not really in much of this movie, and he's certainly not like his more famous character of Screech from Saved by the Bell, but he's still a little goofy, and he plays to that really, really well. Like, he's still got the crazy curly hair, and Shelley Winters is trying to give him a haircut, and he's being kind of quippy about it. And you know, he just kind of seems like, yeah, that kid's gonna do some things too. And he's definitely still one of the greatest parts of watching those old Saved by the Bell shows. And you can see it here too, that he's got something to him. But Winters and Beatty in this, these are two Oscar nominees who starred in super serious dramas in the past, and they're all in on this movie. I mean, they seem like they completely understand that this movie is entirely for kids, and they're just going for it. They're just with it, and they're going in on it. So it's a lot of fun to just kind of see them not seem like they're a little bit above this movie. I think they realized what they were there for, and I think they really kind of appreciated playing the parts that they played. Lastly, the purple people eater guy it's really kind of cute. In the 80s, there were all sorts of things like My Pet Monster, Garbage Pail Kids, Mad Balls, just all sorts of monster-like things that became really kid-friendly. Even the Universal Classic Monsters had toys back then as well, and that was kind of the beginning of their marketing blitz that continues to this day with the Universal Classics. But, this is, it's not only filled with this kind of cutesy, kid-friendly, lovable monster, but everything about this movie is 80s to the max. There are malls, there are laser shows inside the mall, there are kids doing things and being thorns in the side of bad people. I mean, these are all 80s tropes that are just played perfectly in this movie. And this really wasn't an uncommon type of movie where you have kids coming across aliens or monsters. I mean, this was kind of like Mac and Me, but better. And maybe a little bit more in line with Batteries Not Included, that deals with more of a heartfelt concern for people losing their homes and so forth, and getting this outside help. But as I mentioned, this movie really does not have a mean bone in its entire body. And I would have really, really wanted a stuffed animal of Purple as a kid. I just kind of loved like the little Cyclops, fuzzy, almost Muppet-like guy that has a horn that plays music. I mean, I'm sure somebody thought that they might be able to make a toy out of this, but as far as I ever knew, I don't think they did. Also, Purple was created, or at least fabricated, as it said in the credits, by the Chiodo brothers. And they were the people who kind of came up with the concept for the Critters and Critters, and they created the Killer Clowns from Outer Space. So, it's kind of created with somebody who kind of knows their shit about, creating these kind of characters, these kind of crazy, imaginative type of monsters. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday, and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on FilmSeizure.com. Also, you can go to places where fine podcasts are found, like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, all those places. Additionally, you can hop on over to Facebook and Twitter to follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. You can also go over to my website, bmovieenema.com, each and every Friday to check out new posts there. Next week, when I come back, it's episode number 100. And that's pretty exciting. I've got a really, really good movie. I think some people even think that it's, in some regards, better than another big movie that it seems almost like it's aping off of. Anyway, so come back, episode number 100. But until then, stay spooky.